August 2025, United States, Alaska. The Russian dictator, having left his bunker, sets out to meet with the American president. Putin presents his visit to Donald Trump as a triumph. Proof, he claims, that sanctions-driven isolation is ending, and that a deal on Ukraine is already on the horizon. Walking down the red carpet, Putin anticipated swift new business agreements with the US, and imagined he could impose his solution for Ukraine on the West, without Kyiv's participation. But for Washington, the meeting was more a show of strength. Alaska, a land once owned by Russia, became a symbolic stage where Donald Trump made clear to Putin they are not equals, and Russia's leader remains isolated under intense diplomatic pressure. Can the United States stop Putin's aggression? Will Donald Trump succeed in bringing him to the negotiating table for a just peace in Ukraine? All this, right now, in the new episode of Isolated. Joining us is Stephen Moore, former chief of staff of the Republican Party and founder of the charitable organization Ukraine Freedom Project. Stephen, welcome.
Hey, great to be with you. Дуже приємно.
Based on the latest statements coming out of the White House, what, in your view, has led to Donald Trump's tougher stance toward Russia and toward Putin personally?
Donald Trump wants this war to end. And his view is that the war in Ukraine distracting the world from what he views as the real problem, which is China. He thought the best route to getting this war to end was his relationship with Putin, which was apparently pretty good in his view in the first term. And now it is not as good as he thought. So if you know about Trump, if you work in Republican politics, if you watch Ukraine like I do, and I think that it's taken a while to get to this point for Donald Trump, because there's people around him who believe that Trump had the personality, the relationship with Putin, and the leverage to pull Putin away from Xi Jinping, which frankly would be good for the world, because China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are all working together. So if you can pull one of the members of that coalition out, that'd be good. So I think that there's people around Trump counseling patience, saying, hey boss, you can do this. You can pull Putin away from Xi Jinping. And it's taken us this long to figure out that that's not a viable action.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin continues to play the long game, deliberately dragging out the negotiation process. The first contacts between the US and Russia took place in February 2025, less than a month after Donald Trump assumed office for his second presidential term. The culmination of the subsequent series of meetings was Putin's visit to the US state of Alaska for talks with Trump on August 15th. Joining us now is Alexandra Filipenko, American Studies scholar and international commentator for The Breakfast Show. Alexandra, welcome.
Hello, Yuri. Thank you for the invitation.
How would you personally assess the outcome of Donald Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Alaska? To me, it seemed that Trump left that meeting with the Kremlin dictator deeply disappointed.
For a long time now, we've known that Donald Trump has always relied on personal diplomacy, on face-to-face meetings and direct relationships. That's important to him. That's truly how he operates. It's how he worked in business and how he worked during his first term in office. Trump's disappointment, that is the key takeaway from the Alaska meeting. And that moment was crucial. Once again, Donald Trump had placed his hopes in personal diplomacy, in the power of his charisma, in his ability to persuade. He finally got his meeting with Putin, and it turned out those who warned that Putin is not a partner for negotiation were right. Reportedly, discussions on the Arctic were canceled. Talks on strategic offensive weapons, key issue for Trump, were scrapped. So were discussions about China. All of that, and especially the Arctic issue, was swept aside. Afterward, multiple sources reported that Donald Trump was ready to walk out of the meeting altogether, to leave in the middle of negotiations, even before that so-called press conference, which honestly couldn't even be called a press conference. This Alaska summit had to happen. It was necessary. And it was crucial for Donald Trump himself to see firsthand that negotiating with Putin is impossible.
The visit of the Ukrainian president and European leaders to Washington on August 18th was met with some anxiety. Memories were still fresh from the previous Oval Office meeting between the two presidents, which had ended in a verbal spat. This time, however, the world witnessed an unprecedented show of unity. The August 18th summit brought a record number of world leaders to the White House at the same time, and served as proof that the transatlantic alliance remains strong, and that the U.S. is still on the team. Some Republicans have openly criticized Donald Trump for being too soft on Vladimir Putin. From your perspective, is the Republican Party at this stage truly prepared to adopt a tougher, more decisive stance toward Russia and to back it up with action?
Putin has not shown President Trump respect. Kept him waiting on a phone call, tells him that, oh yeah, Donald, let's do a ceasefire, and then he sends 500 drones into Kyiv. Point now that President Trump wants to teach him respect. So what are some things that he could do? Probably the least aggressive move would be to put a lot of tariffs on India, because India is buying a lot of Russian oil, and so Russia is a gas station with an army. And if you turn off they become a lot less aggressive. You can cut off the oil revenues by sanctioning those people buying oil from them. You can cut off their oil revenues by a U.S. destroyer pulling up alongside one of the tankers of the Ghost Fleet and taking it to port. I mean, shut those guys down, that sends a message. The thing that would be most favorable to the Ukrainians would be if they shut down Ukraine's skies, much like they shut down Israel's skies. Dozens, if not hundreds, of planes from NATO countries that were shooting down the drones and missiles that were coming towards Israel. It was very effective. That would send a message.
The Washington summit of European leaders resulted in momentum behind a common security guarantee for Ukraine and the launch of a joint defense supply chain. According to the Wall Street Journal, the U.S. administration has approved the sale of more than 3,000 long-range missiles to Ukraine. These relatively inexpensive and easy-to-produce weapons have a range of up to 450 kilometers. The $850 million military aid package is funded primarily by European countries. At the same time, it's important to note that the U.S. Senate is preparing the most sweeping sanctions yet against Russia. These include 500% tariffs on countries that continue to buy Russian goods and effectively help finance the Kremlin. If Russia continues to stall the end of its war of aggression, the U.S. will implement these measures. Following the Washington summit, President Donald Trump proposed a bilateral meeting between the Ukrainian president and the Russian dictator. Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his readiness for top-level dialogue. The Kremlin, meanwhile, is playing its usual game. Putin even mentioned a light at the end of the tunnel when commenting on U.S.-Russia relations after the Alaska summit. And yet, the history of U.S.-Russia contacts in the 21st century is a path from false hopes of partnership to open confrontation.
President Trump knows all the cards he has still left to play. Clearly, we are supplying NATO with weapons, selling American arms to our NATO allies and to Canada, which then transfer them to Ukraine. This support can certainly be expanded, and the process is already going very well. Matthew Whitaker, U.S. Ambassador to NATO.
Alexandra, speaking of the support the United States is providing to Ukraine, what do we know at this point? What is the position of the White House administration regarding military assistance, both the aid already being provided and what Washington intends to deliver in the future?
If the sources from the Financial Times and Bloomberg are correct, and Ukraine purchases $90 to $100 billion worth of American weapons financed by Europe, this will be a major outcome. This is what Trump understands very well. These funds flow directly into the pockets of American taxpayers, into the hands of Americans, and here you go, American weapons will be sold and deployed. And it's very important to underline that this is not just about aid deliveries, but about real arms sales, all fully financed by Europe. This package includes air defense systems, Patriot batteries, missile defense systems, aviation, and much more. If this proves to be the case, it would mark a major potential deal, a crucial long-term agreement. For Donald Trump, it's also a significant political bonus because he can put his name on it and demonstrate to Americans how he is defending their interests, their economic interests, while also bringing production and industrial capacity back onto U.S. soil. The second point concerns Ukraine receiving money from the United States through the purchase of Ukrainian drones. This would be arranged through guarantees tied to a mineral deal or possibly by other mechanisms. And this, too, is an important issue because Ukraine today seems to have some of the most skilled and professional people in the world working in this area.
Alexandra, speaking about the discussions currently underway regarding security guarantees for Ukraine. In your opinion, what do we know so far about the components of these guarantees?
3 key elements are necessary. First, peacekeeping forces, tens of thousands of European troops who would be stationed either directly on Ukrainian territory or in its immediate vicinity. We're talking about tens of thousands of soldiers ready to deploy to Ukraine at very short notice, and these are very substantial numbers. Second, rapid response forces, a smaller, more agile contingent designed specifically to deter Russia on site. They could be positioned close to the front lines. Donald Trump, importantly, has not ruled out such a possibility. At the same time, it is crucial to recognize that the overwhelming majority of Americans, more than 80% of the population, support aid to Ukraine. But the real question is, what form should that aid take? Most believe the United States should apply pressure on Russia and focus on selling weapons. Some argue that arms should instead be supplied directly from U.S. stockpiles and the federal budget. And there are those who believe American troops are already needed on the ground in Ukraine. Yet it is the group supporting weapons sales and increased pressure on Russia that forms the overwhelming majority. However, if the discussion shifts to so-called boots on the ground, the direct presence of U.S. forces in the combat zone, that support could fall sharply. And this, in turn, would have a direct impact on Donald Trump's approval ratings and the way his administration is perceived at home.
After years of Russia's war against Ukraine and hybrid attacks on the West, it's clear that Putin's main strategy is to exploit America's internal divisions. He tries to sow them through social media, the press, and politicians who echo Kremlin propaganda, arguing that support for Ukraine is too costly and that concessions to Moscow are necessary. Stephen, why does Russian propaganda manage to strike such a chord with the conservative segment of the American population, and of course, with a significant number of Republicans as well? What makes these narratives so effective, and why do they continue to find an audience inside the US?
A lot of Russian money spent on propaganda. By some estimates, between $1.6 and $2.4 billion every year. Russia has figured out how to use those conservative media channels to their benefit, and Ukraine is not. If you look at the media appearances of Ukrainian officials, most of them are on MSNBC or CNN, and nobody in the Republican Party watches those channels. So the Russians just pump negative information, false negative information, and because there's no answer to it, then Americans believe it. And we're answering it, but we don't have $1.6 to $2.4 billion to spend every year answering it. What we're seeing is the people that are in America that are most interested in giving additional aid to Ukraine are American Christians, people that attend church frequently. That's because for 2 years, my project, the Ukraine Freedom Project, telling Americans the stories of Christians who have been tortured and who have been run out of town and have been treated poorly by the Russians. So that resonates.
Western weapons and missile defense systems are exactly what Ukraine urgently needs today. The Kremlin, through long diplomatic games, merely masks the continuation of its aggression against peaceful Ukrainian cities. A week after the bilateral talks in Alaska, Russian forces launched a missile strike on Mukachevo in Zakarpattia, just 35 kilometers from the Hungarian border. The target included a plant owned by an American home appliance company. Earlier, at a press conference near the White House, President Zelensky stated that U.S. security guarantees could include a $90 billion agreement between Kyiv and Washington for the purchase of American weapons, including aviation and missile defense systems. Ukraine is also proposing that the U.S. purchase drones of Ukrainian and joint production. The deal would cover a 5-year period, totaling $50 billion, with production set at 10 million drones per year. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Western partners are signaling that they are prepared to go even further. Several have already announced their readiness to send troops into Ukraine once the war comes to an end. Bloomberg reports that around 10 countries have expressed such an intention. And during a meeting of European officials on August 19th, the topic was discussed in detail, from the logistics of troop deployment to their numbers and the potential locations where they might be stationed.
Europe and the US may be able to act as a united front, but the key is for this united European front to be clearly visible, not only to Donald Trump, but also to the world at large. Right before our very eyes, a profound rethinking is taking place. The European Union is moving away from being merely a customs and economic union and is steadily transforming into a defense-oriented alliance. NATO-style security guarantees for Ukraine with legal force, long-term support, and real protection are turning the EU into a completely different type of political and military union. Of course, the main priority remains a full NATO-style security guarantee for Ukraine. Equally important, however, is the ability to use EU financial resources to support Kyiv, including large-scale arms purchases, as well as the use of frozen Russian assets to fund Ukraine's reconstruction. These measures not only strengthen Ukraine, but also reshape Europe's own role in global security. This is also something of great interest to Donald Trump, who has repeatedly insisted that American money should not be spent on such efforts. By acting as a united front, Europe is assuming responsibility, allowing Donald Trump to focus on his own continent, the American continent, and to dedicate more attention to confronting the challenge posed by China. In this way, he can prioritize the Asia-Pacific region while knowing that Europe is carrying its weight in the defense of Ukraine.
Stephen, finally, I'd like to ask, what is your view on what U.S. policy toward Russia will look like in the future? Will it be a policy of appeasement or one of containment?
So here's what you can expect from Donald Trump: the unexpected. Right now, Trump is saying good things about Ukraine, things that Ukraine needs to hear, and things that would contribute to Ukraine's victory, to Ukraine's security. But it's going to go like this. Donald Trump's going to go up and down. The reason that it's taken him so long to get to this place is because there's voices in the White House that are telling him, listen, you can take Russia away from Xi Jinping, and they're telling him to be patient with Putin. And I think that patience is worn off. But there's always going to be another thing that's unexpected. I'm a Republican, and I spent working with the Democrat administration. Everybody was very patient with President Biden when it took him nearly 2 years to allow Ukraine to use U.S. weapons inside Russia. And I would counsel a little bit of patience to Ukrainians, to pro-Ukraine Americans, and look at Trump and see the education process that's going on. It's going to be rocky, it's going to be crazy, because Donald Trump operates like that. But I think that you're going to see things go in a positive direction. I always looked at Churchill at times like these, and there's great stories of Churchill during World War II. It took him nearly 2 years to get American weapons to England. And he had a room full of people whose full-time job it was to figure out what Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president at the time, was doing and how to convince him to bring U.S. weapons to England. He was hyper-focused on this. And and one of the things that he said after the war was, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, the United States has consistently acted as Ukraine's key partner, providing weapons, financial support, and intelligence while exerting diplomatic and sanctions pressure on Moscow. The Washington summit marked an important tactical victory for Ukraine and its European allies, as the West showed its ability to act with unity. And Ukraine once again proved its agency. The U.S. is moving from words of support to building a strategic architecture of containment together with its allies, making it clear that Kyiv is a crucial partner. And as Ukraine holds the line on the battlefield, it continues to defend its sovereignty in the realm of diplomacy, both in Europe and across the Atlantic.